You don't need to be a quirky nerd in order to learn how to use nodes inside of Cinema 4D. You just need a coach that will teach you how a parachute works before pushing you out of a plane to learn how to skydive. So here we'll break things down one node a day, one video a day, so that you can learn how to 3D model complex parametric models inside of Cinema 4D with ease at a pace that anyone can handle, even a beginner. This is the third lesson, and today we are going over the cube node inside of Cinema 4D. So let's go ahead and get started. If you have any questions at all, please leave it in the comments below so that I can help out. So this is what we're 3D modeling here today, and we're going to be covering how to get these inputs to show up for your scene node so that I can just adjust this to, say, 91, and then we can adjust the height of the countertop in here. And you can access these values even within the standard mode. You don't need to go into your node editor. You can just click on your node's mesh and see these here. So we're going to be going more in depth on how to do that while also going through all the settings for the node for the cube. So let's go ahead back where we left off and go back into our nodes. So we're in our nodes UI that I've adjusted up here in the corner, and down here you'll see if I click on my nodes mesh that we have this cone in here. Now we're going to delete that to replace it with the cube node. So I'll open up the asset browser up here and you'll see we have the cube. I'm going to drag and drop this in here. Now you'll notice we have the geometry. Of course, we want to connect the geometry to the geometry as we do for any other node mesh we are working on. And you can see that we have this cube show up. Now the settings are very similar for the cube node as they are for the regular cube that you can add into your scene. And if you're familiar with Cinema 4D, you probably have seen this before. But even if you're new, you can follow along. So here is our nodes mesh and our cube. Let's first go through the basic tab so that you feel comfortable with this. You can name your node anything that you'd like. So I can name this node countertop, and you'll see it adjusts within here. Now if I click on this again so that it shows up in our attributes manager, you can also adjust the asset version in here. You can adjust the color. So it could be something other than blue, but I'm going to keep it on blue. And you can also adjust how this displays in your node editor. You can choose expanded, and that's how it looks now. You can choose connected. You can choose collapsed. Connected will just show what's connected, or you can choose collapsed and it'll collapse it so that it's smaller and doesn't take up as much visual space. I'll set it back to expanded. You'll see this option to display a comment. So if I want to turn this on and write in a comment, I can say, we are learning about nodes as a note, and then you can see that appears as a comment to the node. So this can come in helpful if you're working with other people and you want them to understand your process and you want to leave them some notes, or just for your future self. Remember what you're doing. I am going to turn that off right now because we don't really need that here. And we need to also show how to get those X, Y, Z values, the size of our cube, to show up as the depth, height, and width. So right now you're probably looking at this and saying, well, Leah, I see the geometry node, but where are the size? So let's talk about how to get the size to show up as ports on your node, so that we can set this up as we did and I showed you on the other countertop model. So under our object tab, you'll see size listed here. And we can adjust the size in here. And we need this to show up as a port. So the thing to notice here is that there's these circles here. If you hit Control and click on one of these circles, it will show up here. So now you can see our size is listed. If we want to see the XYZ, we can click this drop down arrow to see XYZ. If we want these to show up within our nodes mesh when we click on it, we're going to need to drag and drop this to the left panel. add new input, and do this for the X, the Y, and the Z. Now you'll notice that if I click on the nodes mesh, that these values are showing up as X, Y, Z. What if we want to give them a more descriptive name like width, height, and depth? Well, we can do that by double-clicking here. So I'll double-click on the X, and that is the red arrow on our axis here. So that is our width. The Y is the green arrow, and that is our height. The Z, we'll double click on that, that is the blue arrow, and that is our depth. And as I add these in here, you'll also see that they show up here, width, height, depth. So that's how you get that to show up as an option, even when you're in standard mode and you don't have this node editor here. You can adjust those. Now let's click on this again, and now that we have this activated as something we clicked on, you can see its settings again in our attributes manager. So under object now you can see that this has this symbol here, and that means it's connected. You'll also notice that there are diamonds next to these settings as well as these circles. So these circles control the ports. The diamonds are keyframes, so if you click on them, you'll be keyframing a setting. So yes, you can animate your models inside of here if you feel like it. You can have this start at one segment, keyframe it, and then later on you can keyframe it at a higher number of segments, and it will actually animate in your scene. So that's another cool thing about working with parametric models made from nodes, is that you can animate them like that. And there's a whole lot of individual ways you can adjust that. Now segments, we can increase the segments in the X, as you can see here in our viewport. We can increase the segments and adjust them in the Y and in the Z. If you aren't seeing your segments in your display, make sure you have garage shading lines on, quick shading lines, just any one of these that has lines listed. That means you'll be able to view your edges. If you're in something like garage shading, you won't see it. Now we have additional options here like separate surfaces. I'm going to set our segments back to 0 so that we can discuss what this is and why it matters. So sometimes it's helpful to separate your surfaces on your cube for 3D modeling purposes. Right now, these two sides, for example, are sharing a point in this corner. If we turn on separate surfaces, they will no longer be sharing that point, and they will each have their own individual point. You won't see anything happen in the viewport, but it is a change that is happening in terms of the geometry. Now under the fillet, we can enable this, and again you'll see you can create a port and you can keyframe it. So let's enable our fillets so that you know how to use these. We can adjust our segments. The default is set to 5. If I set this to 1, you can see how that looks now. It's a little less rounded. It looks a little bit more like a chamfer. And we can increase this, and you can see that just rounds it out more the more segments you have. You can also adjust the radius, so let's change this from 5 to 1 so that you know what all these settings do. Now for our case, we really don't need a fillet. We don't need the segments, but what we do need to do is set some dimensions in here. So we can still go into our standard mode, and we can adjust this from here as we discussed and test out our very nice new settings we created. So we've got our width here. Let's make that 76. Let's make our height 91, and let's make our depth 76. So now we have this set up and you know how to do it. Now you are an expert of the cube node. If you'd like to learn the geometry axis node and continue on this project, please click this video here, and I hope to see you there.